Hello everyone, it's Paul, and welcome to another installment in my Blackrock Foundry raid guide. Today I'm going to cover Operator Thogar on heroic difficulty. Operator Thogar is a train conductor, and much like Hagen the Unclean in Naxxramas, he will try to hit your raid with environmental effects in the form of giant speeding trains. These trains will come out of one of four doors on the sides of the room and will one-shot anybody caught on the track underneath them. Before we talk about the actual trains, let's go ahead and cover Thogar's abilities and the abilities of the adds that come throughout the entire fight. First, for my tanks, the tank swap mechanic in this fight is a simple debuff applied to the tank currently on the boss called Enkindle. The debuff stacks and can go very high, but it becomes unhealable at about 4 to 5 stacks, so go ahead and swap right around 2. This is a very simple mechanic early on, but later on in the fight when the adds get a little bit overwhelming, it becomes a little bit easier to lose track of this. So make sure that if you do not have stacks of Enkindle on you, it's probably time to taunt. The other ability used by Thogar throughout the fight is the prototype pulse grenade. It makes these blue swirls on the ground, and these will drag anybody standing in them to the center of that and just do simple damage. This mechanic is basically in place so that you have less room to work with on the train tracks and you move around a little bit more. The other thing that really complicates this fight is the different types of adds that come out. Right now we are dealing with a gunnery sergeant here on the train to my left. The train that the gunnery sergeant is on will leave on a timer. You do not need to kill the gunnery sergeant to get that train to leave. You can actually use this to your advantage, and when there's a single gunnery sergeant up, you can choose to basically ignore him and wait for that train to go away by itself, and instead use that time to DPS the boss. All you have to do is make sure that people run out the bombs that they're targeted with away from the raid group. The other two adds worth mentioning are a Gromkar Man-at-Arms and a Gromkar Firemender. The Man-at-Arms is going to cast an ability called Bellow, and this does a big amount of damage to your entire raid group, and it increases in damage the more casts he gets off. The Gromkar Firemender will cast an ability called Cauterizing Bolt. Cauterizing Bolt will inflict 20% damage to whichever add it hits and then heal them for 30% of their health. So you can either interrupt this to prevent the heal from going out, or you can spell steal or dispel it after it actually hits an add and you actually get the damage on the adds themselves. The remainder of the adds in this fight are either turret mobs or they're little melee adds that put a bleed on you. These should be killed by your DPS, but they are not as big of a priority as the Man-at-Arms, Firemender, and Gunnery Sergeants. That covers the abilities for the adds and the boss during this fight, so now I'm going to go ahead and rewind the video and take you through all the train locations and how my raid group handles them in detail. To cross-reference my diagram with colors here, red will be 1, green will be 2, blue is 3, and yellow will be 4. At the start of the fight, we go ahead and pull Thogar all the way to blue because it'll be the place that is the safest for the longest amount of time, and we blow Heroism right off the bat to get as much damage into him as possible right off the bat. When these trains start coming, it is important to note that you need to clear the entire track that is all the way to these wooden dividers, because the trains actually shoot out fire from beneath them, and this can clip you if you're just kind of hanging out on that little divider. Now coming up shortly here, we're going to get what I'll call a double little add train. This means that there's going to be 2 compartments, each containing these little kind of shithead adds that you just pick up, bring to the boss, and AoE down quickly. Death Knights are really good for these types of add trains because they can just mass death grip everything all together. You get some warriors in there, ravager that bitch up, and the adds basically just melt away. The next thing that we're going to deal with here is a Gunnery Sergeant. Now this guy is just mounting that cannon. We choose to kill this particular one to kind of clear up a little bit more room for later phases, and so that we don't have to deal with bombs on some of the tracks that we'll be moving to here shortly. Coming up right after this Gunnery Sergeant dies, we actually have one of the more difficult train dodges at the beginning of the fight. There's going to be a train right on the green marker, and right after that there's going to be one on blue. So as soon as that green train leaves, you need to get the fuck off of blue and onto green and pick up these adds. For the first, what I'll call big adds, because we have the bigger named mobs in this particular pack, so for the first big add train, you want to kill the Firemender first. At least this is just a recommendation, and your raid can choose to handle this differently. but we typically avoid the Firebender so we don't have to deal with her little bullshit heal, because right here our healers can actually handle a few more hits of the Bellows. Once that Firebender is dead and that train goes past on red, we're going to approach the first split. Now what happens here is we actually split our raid group to be able to handle two separate ad trains that come on red and on yellow. That is where the ads are dropped off. The two trains actually come on blue and green. Now, one important note about this part of the fight is that the Man-at-Arms and Thogar should be on separate sides. The way this will work out is one of your tanks will be taunting the boss right before the splits actually happen. You need to make sure that that tank that is actually taking Thogar doesn't taunt early, because he will go up to at least 3 stacks before the timer on these trains expires and they move away, allowing your second tank like me here to run over and taunt the boss. Now up until that first split phase is what I would call phase 1. It's a very low damage output healing phase where you're basically just putting damage onto the boss. Phase 2 is between the two split phases. In between the split phases, you're basically just putting more damage onto the boss, swapping the boss around between your tanks, and avoiding the trains that are coming along. Now here we get another gunnery sergeant, and this is one we actually choose to ignore. So you'll see the person marked with skull there, he's just dropping the bombs away from the raid group, and all of our DPS is actually on Thogar so that we get some more punching into him. Now coming up here on the yellow track is going to be another double little ad train. We simply pick these ads up and move them right away to the green track, where we will have time to DPS them down as much as possible. Now what you'll notice is that all of the bombs that launched by this gunnery sergeant guy are still on the blue track, so they're not impeding us in our movement anyway here on green. Now as soon as that train crosses blue, you should go ahead and move to blue. I'm going to go to red here because I'm a dumbass. And that's actually okay because it's just a moving train. Whenever this train passes, all you gotta do is link back up with your raid group. Again, always keep an eye on those doors so you don't get caught with your pants down. Again, still here in what I'll call phase 2, we're going to be moving to red to pick up another big ad train, and in this one as well, we're going to be killing the Firebender first. Now, the damage whenever the Man-at-Arms is out on the tanks in particular does get pretty high. Now I usually end up using at least one personal here. The big thing you want to remember is that the tank that's on Thogar is not also tanking the Man-at-Arms, because the melee damage that he does is actually pretty big. Remember not to tunnel vision there. Once you pick him up on red, go and move to green shortly thereafter when that train leaves, so you don't get caught while you're tunnel visioning on maybe interrupts. Just as a tank, make sure you're dragging Thogar to the correct positions here. Melee that way can kind of just go brain dead and follow wherever you're going. The timing before the next split phase is actually pretty forgiving, and you get plenty of time to go ahead and kill the Man-at-Arms before the next split happens, so you don't have to deal with him for, once again, that second split. Now during that big ad phase, we ended up leaving a gunnery sergeant up on purpose, so we do have some bombs on the ground here, but they're very, very easy to avoid, and they get a big red arrow over them when they are about to explode. This part of the fight is what I'll call the double gunnery sergeant phase, because hey, guess what? There's two cannons. We end up killing the one that comes in on yellow on the south end of the room, and we'll leave the other one up and deal with the bombs. This part gets a little bit tighter on the positioning. Those prototype pulse grenades aren't that big of a deal. You can keep the boss like we are here on the edge of it. Melee, just make sure you're not standing in them. Tanks, don't stand in them. It's really obvious when you're actually in one because it starts pulling you to the center. Alright, after both of these cannon trains leave, we come to what I'll call the crunch time of this fight. This is where you're going to start taking a lot of damage for the tanks and for the healers, because it's going to be the second split. The way that we handle the second split is that the tank that is going to be going to red, to the north side, which in this case will be me, is going to taunt Thogar right before this phase happens. This means that I'm going to get the lowest amount of Inkindle stacks possible, which actually still ends up being 4 or 5 here. The tank that is on the northern end of the room, the red area, the one where I am now, is going to need just about all of his personal cooldowns and at least 2 healers. Now, I take a lot of damage here, mostly because of all those bleeds that are stacking up on me. Plus, Thogar is actually empowering these ads because he has an ability that inspires all of his bitches. So in order to survive this as a tank, you're going to need smart cooldown usage, big heals, and movement towards the rest of the group so that when we get right here, your other tank can actually taunt him off you. Now, surprise, surprise, I actually die there. All those dots are ticking on me real fucking hard. I get right back up and start picking up ads, almost die again, but get some cooldowns going and heals catch back up. And from here on out, it's just a little burn phase. You get another double little ad train here. I would recommend that after the second split, you just DPS the shit out of Thogar. If your DPS is, it doesn't even have to be stellar, it just has to be decent, you will have him pretty low, and all you got to do is just smack the shit out of him. The bombs from this cannoneer don't even fucking matter because they're not even going to detonate before he's dead. And there you go, that's Operator Thogar. I'm going to go ahead and take all those little diagrams I had flashing in the top left corner. I'm going to put them in one big fucking image so that if you have a raid leader that wants to look at that shit and have it up on the next screen, maybe that'll help you while you're learning the fight, and he can call the safe zones so that you guys can avoid a little bit of learning that we had to do. Now, don't get frustrated with this fight. It is one of the more difficult ones in here. I do also have Flame Bender recorded. I'll be getting that out in the next couple of days, and then it's on to Chromog, Blast Furnace, and Maidens. As always, this has been Paul. This was a pleasure. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.